Welcome to a brand new episode of the Front End Happy Hour podcast. In this episode, we are going to be learning about SQLite, SQL Cloud, Raft, all the things. And to help share knowledge on the subject, we have Marco Bambini and Brian Holt joining us. Yes, you heard me correctly. I said Brian Holt. Our listeners are always asking for Brian to come back and join us. So Brian, it's great to have you back. Marco, it's a pleasure to have you as well. Could you both give introductions of who you are, what you do, and what your favorite happy hour beverage is? Marco, you want to start?
So sure. I'm an Italian engineer, and when I was in university, I wrote the first commercial database management system based on SQLite. It was a much more simple version of what we build today. Since 2013, it has been deployed more than 140 million times worldwide. So it seems like a good idea to start a company and start doing some serious things on top of this remarkable piece of software.
I love that. And do you have a favorite happy hour beverage of choice? Doesn't have to be alcohol. It could be anything, a coffee, water. I don't know.
May I say gin tonic?
Absolutely. Gin and tonic's a classic. It's a good one.
I thought Marco was going to say wine. He's Italian, right? That's like tradition.
He had to flip the script a little bit. It's cool.
That's true. It's true. Well, if you listen to Happy Hour long enough, you probably heard some terrible things said by me before. I'm very excited to be back. I'm Brian Holt. I've been on probably 30, 40, 50 episodes of this podcast. I can't even remember how many. I can't count that high. I am the chief janitor officer of SQLite Cloud. Marco, I always get my title wrong. That was kind of a tradition when I was on this podcast. And I joined about a couple months ago. So it's been super fun to be here. And my favorite happy hour beverage at the moment, I like a good margarita these days. It's a favorite.
Nice. That's a good choice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's getting warm out, so it kind of works well. Do you have like a certain type of margarita that you make, Brian?
My biggest pet peeve is when they get the proportions wrong. I really want to taste the tequila when I drink a margarita. So heavy on the hand with the tequila, lighter on the agave or Grand Marnier or whatever they choose to put in it.
That's a good call. I like to actually taste the tequila as well, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, and I'm the host of Front End Happy Hour, Ryan Burgess. Let's dive in. I'm curious to know why we're talking about SQLite. It has been around for over 20 years, and it seems to be popping up more these days. So I'm looking to both of you. Why has it become popular? What's going on?
Mainly because it's a remarkable piece of software. It was very powerful 20 years ago, and Dr. Rip continued to improve the product, and in the recent years trying to squeeze every single % in performance improvement. And so we now have a library which is very lightweight in terms of research usage, but it's incredibly fast. And in traditional databases, because performing a query is time consuming, you try to write very big queries in order to query several tables and join the results. While in SQLite, you can do the opposite. You can do tens of micro queries, because each query could be simple to perform, simple to maintain, and you are guaranteed to have a reply in microseconds. And so, it's so performance-wise and so optimized that a lot of people tend to be the first choice when you need to choose a database. And it's already installed in every device. It's literally installed by default in billions of devices out there. And so using SQLite is like using a system library. You don't need to install anything else, and it's free to use. So why not?
I think what's interesting and peculiar about the SQLite story is that it's been maintained by a very tight group of maintainers for a very long time. You have Dr. Hip, who's the primary creator and maintainer and has been the entire time, and a couple of other blessed contributors. And it's open source, but it's not open contribution. You can't just go contribute to SQLite, which I think is another interesting thing. But I think that level of focus for so long on keeping it well maintained, well tested, well, performance, all that kind of stuff. It's like the perfect story for a piece of software over that amount of time. So just like Marco was saying, like it's been this amazing piece of software, but it's been hyper focused on this like very local oriented kind of story of like, I have SQLite running on a file on the same process or like in the same, physical location of whatever is using it. And then what Marco has done here and now what our team is doing in SQLite Cloud is we're taking that remarkable piece of software and we're adding in the things that it doesn't have, like the network layer, role-based authentication, some other really niceties on top of that, so that you can take this like really simple, performant piece of technology and you can use it anywhere. You can use it anywhere that you've been using a cloud database. It has all the capabilities that you're going to need to be able to do 99.999% of what web developers are doing anyway, which is just CRUD, right? So I don't know. That's kind of the story that when I started looking into why is this resurging now, it's because people have been using SQLite for so long. It's such an easy to use, simple piece of software to approach. Like you look at like the Rails getting started kind of thing, and it has SQLite all through it. Django has it all through it. Prisma like has a really good story with it as well. And so all these people kind of realize things like, wait, we can have the simple, the performant of what SQLite is without all that complexity, and we can still do everything we need to do. Like, why would we ever switch after that? And so I think with all those things kind of being built in this kind of, recent renaissance of SQLite, I think that's what's really driving kind of the fervor there.
I love that too, because it's like sometimes like we try and reinvent the wheel too many times as engineers. We've done it and seen it many, many times. And sometimes you need to take a step back and go, do we really need to do that? Like, what are we getting out of the benefits? And like, what do we truly need for this software? And I think that that's like a powerful story, right? Like people know how to use SQLite. If you've been doing software engineering for the past few years, 10, 20 years, you've touched it at some point in time. And even what you'd said, Brian, it's in so many of the popular projects that people are using. It's there already. And I think that makes a ton of sense to me. Like it really, truly does. And it's simple. It is very simple to use. And there's days I just don't want to learn something new either. So I think that that's a powerful story in itself.
There's some article out there. I think I've even referenced it on this podcast before about innovation tokens. It's been so long I can't even remember who wrote it or where I read it. But this person kind of made this assertion, like when you're building something new, it's very tempting to go and add all the latest wild software to it, right? Let's build this in HTMX. Let's host it and do all this wild stuff with it. And this person made the argument, it's like you have 3 innovation tokens on any project that you work on, and you spend it on a couple of pieces of bleeding edge software that's going to make your business case better, and then everything else needs to be as boring as possible. And that's kind of what I like about SQLite and the capacity. It's like it's so well maintained. It's such a kind of tight surface area. It's a pretty boring piece of software from that perspective, right? And that's what just gets me excited about it. Like I've been doing tons of customer interviews, just asking people like, what do you like about SQLite? What prevents you from using it more? And a lot of people are telling me things like, well, I love that Postgres does JSON, or I love that this other database has full text search based into it, or I need like vector databases because I'm doing like LLM stuff. And my response to all those people is like, SQLite can do that. Like it can do all of these things because there's all these really, like there's a very rich extension system for SQLite as well. So it handles almost everything that you're looking for it to do. And people just don't realize it. They just assume that it's like this toy database that doesn't do all the wonderful things it really can do.
So do you think it's a bit of like an education problem then? Like people just aren't seeing what it can do?
Education, kind of a branding thing as well. Like it's been branded for so long to be this like, you embed this in like lightweight use cases, or you use it to like get started and then you have to migrate. And so people just have that assumption and they don't really challenge it because why would you, right? And by the way, I am not at all downplaying how great a piece of software Postgres or MySQL or any of those other ones are. I mean, I literally taught a course on Postgres for front-end masters. What I am saying is that it's worth another look at SQLite to see if it covers your use cases, because in all reality, it probably does. Like, and I'm a big believer in the principle of least power, right? Choose the tool that's the least powerful that can accomplish the task that you're trying to do, because you're going to save yourself, a learning curve. You're going to save yourself bugs and all these kind of things. So yeah, I think it's an education. I think it's a branding thing, and I think it's people need to challenge their assumptions a little bit.
Always. That's advice for anything. Always. So good. I'm curious, Brian, you had brought up MySQL and Postgres. Great examples of something that are being heavily leveraged and for years too. Like, this is not something that's new either. What would make someone, I'm building a new project or my team is building something brand new. Why would I choose SQLite over Postgres or MySQL?
It's a good question. I'm sure Mark will have a good response to this as well. Here's my opinion. I'm really not going to try and talk anyone out of choosing the database that they know and like. So if you're a Postgres master and you are just like ready to go full on that, like, you'll get nothing but a high five from me, right? Because I really like Postgres. What I am saying is that it does a lot of stuff that I don't need. It does many, many things that I don't need. And I like that SQLite, like, it's really cool that I can just throw it directly at my project. I can commit the file, right, that directly to my Git repo. It's really easy to set up with Docker. You just attach it to a volume, and then it just saves that so like that entire local first story with SQLite is just out of control, right? Like, it's the best. You really can't imitate it. And like, SQLite runs on a potato chip, right? If you're doing stuff on like Arduinos or stuff like that, like, it's impossibly easy to put that SQLite in there. What's really cool about some of the stuff that Marco is building now and now our team is now building is the ability to like not only get like SQLite running into the cloud, but you can actually get it running on the device so that you load all that device or the information from your cloud database directly onto the device itself. And then you can just run local queries, right? So, I mean, I was talking to a data scientist yesterday. How many times do you open like a chart, right? And you like move the facet or the filter, and it takes 30 seconds to reload because it has to go back out to the cloud. The cloud has to run a bunch of queries, and then it brings all the data back down, right? I worked at Snowflake before I worked here, and I'll tell you that it pisses off a lot of people, right? Pissed me off. And Snowflake is great. Like, it's actually quite fast from that regard, but like, latency is just real, right? You are literally limited by the speed of light there. With SQLite and now some of the stuff that we built on top of it, you can just load everything locally onto the device, read and write locally, and then the processor will backhaul all of that information back to the cloud, right? So everything's running at local speeds. Local first is what people are kind of tagging that experience as, and it's for you as the developer. You're just reading and writing SQL. You haven't really changed your paradigm at all. You don't have to learn it. There's nothing to learn there, right? It's all just the same stuff you were doing, but all of a sudden you went from having to have 300 milliseconds minimum on every single request to having a couple of milliseconds at worst, right?
But the first one that I'd like to point out is that when most of the time you already have the data local, so locally to your application, and most of the time it's inside an SQLite database. And if you want to switch to another database engine, you need to migrate the data and change the logic behind your SQL statement. While if you choose to use SQLite Cloud, we are using the SQLite engine. We never forked the SQLite library. And so that means that you don't need to change your SQL statement. You don't need to change your code or your logic. Everything works as expected, except that instead to be local, it's on the cloud. And another important point is that you should really not compare SQLite Cloud with MySQL or Postgres, because we offer way more than a simple server-side database system. We offer you fully distributed system. Thanks to Raft, we can guarantee strong consistency. So you can literally scale your application worldwide and without any effort and without any code change or any investment in your libraries. Because since day one, we built the entire system on top of that. So it's been fully distributed. We can guarantee that in case some nodes crashes or in case of network issues, your solution will continue to work fast.
That's very cool. So I feel like it's like, we mentioned that SQLite is very, simplistic. And what you all sound like are doing are adding a lot of the, not complexity, I don't want to call it that, but you're making it so that like all the things that SQLite may be missing to that education part or what people are asking for, you're like, no, but we're actually allowing this on top of it. We're, extending it to the cloud. We're making it easier for people to do that, which I think is really cool. So it's like, yeah, it's the quick and fast, easy use case on your local device, but then also you still have this piece in the cloud too, which is like, so your data is migrating to the cloud. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I am curious about Raft. That's something I'm not familiar with, and I'm sure there are people out there that haven't, dealt with it. I'm curious, what is Raft and like, what is it doing to help SQLite?
Well, Raft is a consensus algorithm developed for distributed system. And thanks to Raft, your cluster can be composed by many nodes. Everything works transparently for you, except that your database scales better and you can have a reply. For example, with our solution, we guarantee that the node that is much closer to the request is the node that always reply to you, so we can minimize the latency. And basically, when you perform a write operation, Raft makes sure to have a consensus over the write operation. And when, from a client perspective, you receive a positive reply, you can be sure that your information is written permanently into your cluster. And even in case some node crashes or, I don't know, the hard disk fails in some way where you lose all your database, the other nodes of the cluster can collaborate in rebuilding the database. And so you can guarantee that a strong consistency of the data and the reliability of your network.
We should post in the show notes here that Marco sent me like a visual representation of how Raft works. That helped me a ton to understand it. But the thing that like kind of convinced me like that this is actually like a really interesting, cool piece of technology. It shows that like if you have like a leader node and it has like 5 or let's say 4 follower nodes, and one of them goes offline, they like hold an election and they get a new leader, and it works even if there's like a network partition and like you have 2 nodes over here and 3 nodes over here. What happens when the network partition heals? And also you had 2 leaders, and how do they like merge their the data and like what's happened in the meantime? It's on one hand like actually very conceptually approachable, but it's also just like impressive that like it's able to be so resilient despite challenging network conditions.
That's awesome. No, I love all that. Thank you for the explanation. I think that really helps just understand like what the benefits are coming along with the algorithm and how that actually works. So let's maybe go a little bit more into the local first architecture. I think that is a really good, compelling story. Like for me, definitely when I'm building, especially smaller like side projects, it's like that's all I need sometimes. Like sometimes I'll just even write some JSON just because I'm like, I just want that local file, and you just need something small. So I want to go a little bit further in that, like what other benefits do you all see for like local web development, not having to, set up the database? Like I can think of so many, but I know you all have thought about this more deeply, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
My biggest thing with it is like, how many times have you written like a project and everything works wonderfully locally, and then you deploy it and all of a sudden you have like race conditions, you have huge network things like, and everything just kind of falls apart because all of a sudden everything got stretched apart, right?
Yes.
Basically every time for me, right? And I'm probably just a bad developer. Everyone knows that. But
Well, Brian, I'm terrible too because I'm dealing with this. Like, I think literally yesterday I was dealing with issues on that. So I totally get it.
Yeah. Beyond that, like, it's not like you'll run into issues of like, cross origin resource sharing. You'll run into like other bugs you just don't expect because everything was locally running great on your computer with zero latency between the pieces. And all of a sudden you have like now network conditions behind it and all sorts of additional factors kind of introduced here. And so just the entire local first movement, not just us, but the entire idea of like you kind of basically replicate whatever that is running on your local computer for your participants of whoever's like, using your app, whether that's just on your server or that can even be like on like a mobile device, right? You can have everything running local to an app, right? The nice thing is like everything, like they get that same kind of like lightning fast experience that you, the developer, are getting. Like how many times have we had to talk about on stage or at conferences of like, yes, you need to try this on slow connections. Yes, you have to try this on, blah, 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 whatever. And so I'm a big fan of this like local first idea. I don't know if I'm necessarily sold on the name because I think it's confusing, right? But I love the idea of co-locating your data and your app logic so that everything is just in this very tight loop that's very reproducible, that everyone can kind of get that like lightning fast local experience, right? And I think couple that with like emerging technologies like React server components or the various permutations for the other frameworks of you now have the data sitting next to the server, sitting next to like basically the client side logic, right? And all that is happening in one very tight loop. And then you're sending just like a minimal packet down of like the result to your client, right? That entire thing then ends up with a user with a very fast and not only just like a fast to display, but fast to be interactive experience that I think it's just kind of unbeatable. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and we strongly believe that it's time for a radical paradigm change because especially on mobile development, if you try to turn airplane mode on, probably 99% of your app seems like doesn't work as expected. With an offline sync library, you can really develop the best user experience because the user we can continue to use your application, even if the network is unstable or there is no network at all. And when the network goes online again or you turn off airplane mode, we guarantee that everything is synced across all the devices or all your nodes in your cluster without any conflict.
But speaking of that offline first experience, like Ryan, I know you've written like service workers, that kind of stuff, and like offline first code. It's hard. It's actually really hard code to write because you have to like anticipate how like network conditions can change and like connecting and reconnecting and all that kind of stuff. It's time consuming to write that kind of code, and frankly not fun in my opinion, though possible. The nice thing with this like local first architecture is you're just reading and writing SQL to a database, right? And then it's the database that's handling all of the offline sync stuff. So your code doesn't change. You don't have to change anything about how you're interacting with that database. You're just reading and writing data, right? And then the database will handle everything else for you. Like that was also another part that I found super, super compelling.
That's the magic part. Like, I love that. It's just like all those things, Brian, that you said absolutely are true. It is difficult and it's something that you're having to think about as the engineer building it, but then also debugging and, figuring out issues that come up because there's lots of issues that come up. And that's just more that you have to think about, especially when you're like, I'm just trying to build this app and I want it to work for my users. It's like, that's huge when you have just something doing the heavy lifting and something that's been heavily tested too, right? Like it's meeting a lot of other customer use cases and you're getting a lot of those benefits. It's like, it's the build versus not buy, right? It's like, that's a big portion here is like, there's a lot of benefits that you get from that. So I love that. But then another thing that really struck with me too was oftentimes at companies, we're trying so hard to squeeze out just any little performance gain that we can get, especially for, companies trying to move that bottom line. Like speed matters. Like we know that. And so, being able to not worry about that like latency and just like know that it's happening behind the scenes afterwards when there's a better connection, that's huge. And I think if that can be well sold and like, I guess, trusted, that to me is like gold, right? Like, I think that to me is a really powerful piece of this like equation. So that's really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. What about security wise? That's one that I'm going to say it. It's always like my afterthought is like, you know, especially when I'm building like some small app, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Someone steals my data. It's not the end of the world for some of the smaller things I've done. But obviously, when you're building larger applications with major users, what can we think about for security, especially in that local first development, having it in a mobile app that is, you know, transferring data after the fact? You know, what does that look like for a security story?
Well, we enforced row level security on server side. And so locally, you just see your data and the data you choose to share with other users, nothing else. And there are others. I mean, there are alternatives to this feature offered by other companies. And some companies think that the best way to proceed on server side is that, I don't know, for example, if you develop a to-do application and you publish your application on the App Store and you have 1 million users, some company thinks that the best way to proceed on server side is to have 1 million different databases all related to your to-do application. And in our opinion, this is a nightmare for a developer's point of view, because if you need to do analytics or you need to analyze the database, you need to open 1 million individual connection. I mean, this doesn't work and doesn't scale. In our solution, you have just one big, huge database with all the data from your 1 million user inside. And in each user have a shared ID, so they just see what you decide that they can access to. And for a developer perspective, it's much more simple to use just one database, perform analytics, and do whatever you want with your database.
The way I like to think about it is that you can open the network tab on any one of the apps that you use, and you can look at the network key that you're using to call the APIs, right? And you can take that network key, you can open Postman, you can just start blowing away your data. You can call any API key as yourself, right? And do whatever damage you can with whatever public API they're exposing. It's the same kind of thing here. It's like we're using a sharding technique where users can basically only access data that applies to themselves, that you allow them to, that you give them a role to access them. So yeah, they can open their database and they can blow themselves away. But I mean, they could have done that in the first place anyway, right? So
yeah, it sounds like you're like the roles is the big key selling point there, is like having that ability to just set up like permissions. That's the big one.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. I like that. All right, I feel like I'm sold on like SQLite again. So yeah, like I think you all have done a good job. I'm like, damn, I need to use this on my next project. What would I do to get started? Like, what's advice you all give for someone who's like, all right, maybe they've touched SQLite in the past and haven't touched it for a long time. Maybe they haven't touched it at all. Maybe they're newer to the web development world and they've leveraged MySQL, Postgres. What are recommendations or suggestions you have for someone to get started?
Well, I'm teaching an SQLite course in about 2 months. In about 2 months, I'm going back to Front-End Masters to teach a course on SQLite, which I think I will do a good job. I hope I will do a good job.
I always enjoy your courses, Brian. So I'm pretty confident that you'll do a good job on it. So obviously, Front-End Masters does a good job too. So I
was going to say now we're Front-End Masters brothers, right?
It's true. Yes. Yeah. And, we just now all who have been teachers there know of the axe in the bathroom, right? Like that is like, a hidden secret in the hotel.
The sacred hatchet. That's true. For anyone listening, they put Front-End Masters instructors in the same hotel. And so they weirdly has a hatchet in the bathroom, which is, it's actually really cool. I kind of want to steal one of these times I go. Yeah, what I was going to say about SQLite and learning it is like the nice thing about SQL as a language, kind of in general, is it is a standardized language, and like there's some variant across Postgres, SQLite, MySQL, Oracle, Aurora. Pick your favorite there. But generally, the high level principles remain about the same. So you can take any skills that you already have with SQL, and you can apply this to SQLite. That's a really easy way to get started. Or you can pick your favorite ORM. I used to have like a very sour take on ORMs, but I think they've progressed so much from the time that I last used. I think the first one I ever used was for Zen Framework 1 in PHP, and it's probably me being the idiot, but I just couldn't do it very well, and I found myself fighting it more than actually getting benefit out of it. But things today like Prisma work great with SQLite, and therefore you can hop into one of those kind of things. Prisma being my personal one that I've used and liked, and then it's not too hard.
Yeah, you can just go to our website in the documentation section. There are tons of documentation about SQLite, and there is also an iterative console. So you can try to perform SQL statement and you see the result on the web page. It's all driven by SQLite, compiled, transpiled to WASP. So you can do your experimentation without any other tools, just goes online to our documentation section.
That always makes sense. So I'm assuming there's good, solid documentation there that will help people get started.
Yeah, the like in-browser SQL stuff that they've built is actually really cool, really, because you can just run the queries there and see the results.
Before we dive into picks, I would love to hear just any last words of advice for leveraging SQLite. What advice would you give folks?
Just do the simplest thing possible. Just start a SQLite process. Doesn't even have to be us, right? Just a normal vanilla out of the box one, and start playing around with it. I think you'll find pretty quickly that it's incredibly easy to get started and incredibly easy to just kind of build up, and then attach it to your favorite web framework. Most of them have documentation of how to get started with SQLite. Yeah, just get going, and then realize that like once you've built something that you're proud of and you want to share, hopefully we're the place that you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go from SQLite locally to SQLite Cloud, right? That's kind of our goal there, is that progression.
Yeah, I like that a lot too, that, you can start like locally. Like I know we went really hard on the local development side, but I like that point is that, you don't have to go all the way and like, I got to pay for SQL Cloud. It's like, you can get started and kind of build that application, take the time. Cause a lot of my side projects start out and I get, momentum, and then I sit on it for 2 months and I go, oh yeah, I need to go back to that. And like, I didn't have to pay a bill yet. Like I can still develop, but then when I really need the power of the cloud, I'm like, cool, I can go enable that. And I think that's a powerful story too.
Yeah, well, we'll have a generous free tier for people that want to like get started and not pay anything. And one of my favorite features is like you get started with the local SQLite database, you do a bunch of stuff, you're happy with the schema, just upload your database, and all of a sudden now you're in the cloud, right? That's all it takes. Like you can literally just drag and drop the file. It works.
That's so good. It's like back to FTP days. You just like drag and drop and it should work, right?
We should make an FTP endpoint. That sounds like a terrible idea and I love it. We should definitely do
does, but I'm like, yeah, it might resonate with some people. They're like, oh yeah, I remember when that was that simple. So there was a lot of problems with that approach, but hey, that was a simple way of doing it.
Yeah,
I love that. All right, well, let's dive into picks. In each episode of the Front End Happy Hour podcast, Brian will be very familiar with this, as we like to share things that we found interesting with all of you. Sometimes they pertain to the subject, oftentimes they don't. But yeah, let's share some of our picks. Brian, you want to start it off?
Yep, I got 2 picks. First one is a video game that I just cannot put down. It's called Backpack Hero, which sounds like the weirdest game. And like it came out a while ago and I was like, that sounds very dumb. I'm not going to try that. And then I was like, it works on Mac, right? So I was flying to Minneapolis to teach for Front End Masters. Like, well, I need something on my computer. I downloaded it and now I play it all the time. So that one's quite fun. It's kind of like it's a roguelike, if that means anything to you. If it doesn't, then it's just fun. You should try it. And then I think last time, I can't remember the last time I was on Front End Happy Hour, but I'm finishing my MBA literally next week, which is wild to say out loud. And if there's one thing I've learned during my master's, it's that everything is a spreadsheet. So my pick is Microsoft Excel.
Oh man, Brian, no.
It is. I use it all the time now. Marco can tell you that I send him just random ass spreadsheets on a fairly regular basis, and someone once said, and I don't remember, it might be Paul Graham or one of those VC people, that every startup's primary competitor is Microsoft Excel. And now I can see why, because you can do almost anything in Microsoft Excel, and whatever you're doing must be better than Microsoft Excel. So I both love and hate it, and love it, and it's terrible, and you should all use it.
I love it. Like, it's such an interesting pick, but I see your points on it, so that's funny. All right, Marco, what kind of picks do you have to share with our listeners?
Oh, well, I have a couple of side projects. Some years ago, I wrote a 17th century church in my local village, and I'm now trying to renovate the church. So one day will become our office, I guess. So it's a lot of history, a lot of things to do, but it's a nice project.
It's really cool.
Awesome. You'll have to make sure to share a link to it as well.
Oh yeah, sure. And when I'm not running SQLite Cloud and I'm not trying to renovate a church, I like to play tennis. I like to play tennis a lot. And do gardening, because I feel the need to do some physical work, spending all the day developing and thinking about a lot of difficult tasks. And so, yes, everything is very normal in my life.
I like that. I feel like I just recently heard someone saying about gardening how it is their time of like reflection. Like they're able to I think there's something about connecting with nature, and then also just like having that quiet time. They're actually doing work, but like it's in their head, like thinking through problems or, reflecting on their day. And I was like, that's so cool. Like that they have this like hobby that, is really cool to do, but then they're also finding it as a mechanism to just have that self-reflection and time to themselves. So that sounds like a powerful thing to be doing.
Oh yeah, totally agree.
That's awesome. Well, I have two picks for this episode. One is a TV show, which is a Netflix original. It's a limited series on Netflix that follows, it's called Griselda, and it follows the story of Griselda Blanco, which is one of the most notorious like narcos lords in history. She's a pretty badass woman. I will just say that it's been a really good story. I think I only have like 1 or 2 episodes left. It's been out for a while now, and I thoroughly recommend checking that one out. It's a really good story and super well done. It's similar to like Narcos, the show, if anyone watched that one on Netflix.
Yeah, it's got the woman from Modern Family, right?
Yeah, and she's like, it's yeah. Yes, thank you. I was like, it was on the tip of my tongue. I knew her first name was Sophia. But thank you, Marco. She's awesome. Like she's so good in Modern Family, but I think she plays this role very well. Like it feels like, just like even comments she says in Modern Family about like how she would do things in Colombia, and then you see her play this part. I'm like, oh yeah, you are very badass.
That's awesome.
And then my second pick is kids' temporary tattoos. They're so cool nowadays, way cooler than when I had been growing up, where, just get those dinky little tattoos that were like, a little rainbow or a star. I don't know. They just weren't very cool looking. Now you can get like tattoo artists have designed, temporary tattoos. You can get full sleeves for your kids. My daughter has her both arms and legs fully covered in like these large temporary tattoos that I got her just off Amazon. So I highly recommend checking that one out. Brian and Marco, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. I definitely learned a lot more about SQLite, more like the current state of things. And I really very much appreciate that. And I hope our listeners do too. Where can people get in touch with you if they have questions or want to learn more?
I mean, Twitter is usually the best place for me. I'm at HoltBT. If you're interested in talking about SQLite, just send me an email. I'm brian@sqlite.io. Happy to talk to anyone and anyone about stuff that they're doing. And yeah, send me an email.
Yeah, you can contact us on the website. There is a form section. Or yes, you can contact me directly, marco@sqlitecloud.io, or send me an email.
Oh, and we're building a forum, right? So pretty soon at community.sqlitecloud.io, you'll be able to come and hang out, ask us, ask the engineers questions, talk about SQLite and/or cloud. So yeah, that'll be a good place too.
Those are always good, like just to get answers for things that probably have already been answered, which is always nice too. Yeah, I like that. Well, thank you all for listening to our episode. You can find us on Twitter at FrontEndHH. You can find us on YouTube at FrontEndHH. Whatever, and also really wherever you like to listen to podcasts on. Subscribe, leave us a review, let us know how we're doing. Any last words, you two?
Man, I normally have something snarky to say and I forgot to prepare something. So
do you really need to prepare that, Brian? Like, do you actually prepare that stuff ahead of time?
Man, we're doing this at like 10 in the morning, so I have not been drinking. So unless but I'll borrow from my favorite podcast, my other favorite podcast, which is Behind the Bastards. And their tagline is, "I love you, go to hell."
Fine word, stand by.
Yep.